Today we are here to continue the series on discussion on COVID-19. We have finished the first epidemic act. The second was by Krishna sir on pathology of the COVID-19. Today I am here to discuss or share some few points about the clinical approach or what are the symptomatology of COVID-19. COVID-19, as you all, good afternoon. COVID-19, as you all know, has played a major havoc in the overall functioning of the country, of the economy, and made a lot of depressive events, personal events, family events, all on a general economic background. Okay, and COVID-19 was the term was coined by WHO, which stands for coronavirus disease 19, specifically 19 because it was found in the last few weeks of December 2019, and that is the name that the 19 is used for COVID-19. And since this COVID-19 was found in China, in the province of Wuhan, a lot of researches were conducted and a lot of details were coming out one after the other. Few were refuting, few were supporting the data which was coming out. And the first initial thing which came out was that it came from bats, and a lot of viral videos went on which showed the diet of the Chinese people. They have been eating it for a long period of time, for centuries together, but very many were highlighting that it is because of their dietary habits that this has come up, and few were blaming them for spreading it to the rest of the world. But irrespective of what was happening, the cases went on spreading. And the first few weeks in the Jan, it was propagated that it is not going to come to India, right, because of the temperature which is prevalent in our country. Right? So initially it was told that after 27 to 28 degrees it will not survive. So Indians also were a little relaxed that it is going to spread in the rest of the world, but it will not come to India. There were a few doctors who were claiming that Indians will not get affected. They were ready to sign on the bond paper and claim that it will not affect the Indians. Right? But as the data went on coming out, it was quite evident that it is going to survive in any temperature because of the continuous mutations. And then it came to our country and it went on spreading, and then it was spreading throughout the world, and it went on spreading first to the European countries. Mostly Italy was the most affected country, and then the rest of the European countries. Then it's followed by Brazil, United States, and then it came to the Asian countries. And the exodus of the NRIs which came into the country got a lot of infections, and they went on spreading to the rest of the people. So there are again few theories which were claiming it to be planned biological warfare. Okay, like last time Sir had raised the question that it is a biological warfare developed by China in its own laboratories in Wuhan, and then it was spread to the rest of the world. Okay, there are still theories which are refuting it. There are few theories which are still supporting that. There was one Nobel Prize laureate who claimed that if it is proved that it is not a biological warfare, he will submit his or surrender his Nobel Prize. So that was his conviction that he has studied the virus and it has been found that it is not a natural virus. Simultaneously, we were also fighting another viral disease, which was what I named it as pan-mediademic, because a lot of viral videos were circulating, some were supporting the disease, which was some were refuting, some were making jokes on it, some were making memes on it. There's few parliamentarians who were taking advantage of the situations. Right? There was one famous parliamentarian who was making a video viral which went on claiming "Go Corona Go." You must have seen that video. And then a lot of rumors went on spreading, which created a lot of anxiety in the public, unnecessary fears, unnecessary doubts, especially in the elders who were supposed to be the most affected people, or supposed to be the most morbid people to be in the risk zone. So then came the lockdown, which was initiated by the government of India, and there were main things which was supposed to be followed as a precautionary measure. That is, the entire country went into lockdown, stay at home, use of face mask and use of hand sanitizers. And many people made advantages of all these things. Also, all the FMCGs companies made huge business because of the sanitizer market, which was flooding the domestic markets. But the SMS is still in place. We should not forget that the sanitization, masking and social distancing, irrespective of whether it is the unlock has opened up, not opened up, you still have to follow this. But Indians, as we are all aware, are bound to break the rules. Okay? If you go to the city in Hyderabad itself, it's a very scary situation. People have taken advantage of the unlock as if they have come out of the jails. Mask is out of place, social distancing is not maintained, sanitization is just for namesake. Okay? Most of the masks you see are on the chins, okay? Or in the necks. Okay? So people have flaunted the rules and they have spread the disease to an extent that it is now, it is claimed that there will be a new second wave of disease which will be coming up. Coming to the symptomatology, the symptoms, as we all know, have been in the various, most of the symptoms are from the respiratory system. The respiratory system, as it is already known, that virus itself as a class of viruses is known to affect the respiratory system. Okay, so this one is a new strain of virus, new type of virus, which is called as SARS-CoV-2. Okay, so I have divided into the classification of the symptoms, and I will be focusing not on the details of each and every symptom, because most of it will be evident from the symptomatology when the patients come to us. But let us try to understand what we should be focusing on and how should we come to a probable diagnosis, and then go ahead with the investigations if they are needed, not needed. So on an average, the incubation period is 5 to 6 days. And there are researches which are supporting this claim that the incubation is around 5 to 6 days, but there are studies which have shown that the symptoms can start on the 3rd day itself and can start even after the 13th day of exposure to the virus. Okay? So the CDC has recommended a incubation or a quarantine period of 7 to 14 days, and these studies have support that conviction that it has to be a quarantine period of at least 14 days after the exposure, irrespective of whether you have symptoms or no symptoms, because most of the people are under the impression that they are not symptomatic, so they can roam around freely, but they are not aware that they are spreading it to the other people. Most of the times the elderly people more than 65 years of age who are at higher risk because of the comorbidities. Age, as you all know, there is no age bar for the symptomatology. Everybody has to follow all the SMS protocols so that they do not get infected, either as not infecting the other people. But above 65 people should be taken care of. Even if people are asymptomatic carriers, they should take care that they take care of their elders at home. They should maintain social distancing, maintain all the hand hygiene, sanitization. If they are working in a public sector, if they are working as a public servants, they should take care that they do not get the infection back home and infect their elders at home, because if they are with comorbidities, they are likely to get infected, and the mortality will be quite high in those age groups. the most common symptoms: fever, dry cough, and tiredness. So fever can be so fever can be a low grade fever ranging up to a high grade fever with chills, without chills, all kinds of fever. So there was a dictum in the initial few months of April and May where it was said that any fever should be considered as a COVID fever, and based on the other symptomatology you have to prescribe medicines or you have to go ahead with the investigations if required. Dry cough is the classical symptom of COVID, and tiredness because of the ongoing inflammatory changes in the body. Less common symptoms: aches and pains, body aches, joint pains, sore throat, diarrhea, conjunctivitis, headaches, loss of taste or smell, and a rash on the skin, discoloration of fingers and toes, mostly because of the cyanosis which can be present. And initially it was not very prominent, but now it has come to be known that loss of smell and taste can be picked up early in the symptomatology and can be investigated accordingly. The serious symptoms: the breathlessness, shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, which can lead to a hypoxic brain damage, leading to loss of speech or movements, leading to paralysis, strokes, or chest pain and pressure or heaviness in the chest can be considered as a later on symptoms which can land up into ARDS. So since this comes from a coronavirus, comes from a flu-like symptom, also known as most of the symptoms, if they are not diagnosed as COVID, it can be diagnosed as an influenza-like illness. So that is the protocol which has been followed by the government officials, and Jim's Hospital also has a format which has to be submitted at the end of the day to the nearest PHC, where they have to notify all the symptoms, all the patients who have come with ILI-like symptoms or influenza-like symptoms. So compared to, if you can compare the COVID-19 to flu or a common cold, you see that the dry cough and fever, as I've told in the initial slides, is the most common or most prominent symptom, okay, followed by sore throat, shortness of breath, headache, body aches, and exhaustion. Okay. Whereas in dry cough and fever is also in influenza, less common in common cold, but headaches and body aches are more common in influenza, and exhaustion is more prominent in influenza, except in cases of COVID also you can get exhaustion if the patient has not been treated adequately or if the comorbidities have led to an overt exhaustion. Okay. And the single lines are rare symptoms and the double lines are not observed. So in a common cold, diarrhea will not be a symptomatology, whereas sneezing is never present in COVID-19. So if you have a case of fever with sneezing, with sore throat, then you are most likely not seeing at a COVID-19 case, except in cases where the RT-PCR might come up as a positive finding. So this is a source from WHO and CDC, the comparison of COVID-19 as with respect to influenza and common cold. So let me share with you two examples or two cases which I have seen in recent times. One 25-year-old female had come with complaints of cold, cough and fever with headache, but there was the history she gave was that she got wet in rain, but she had also travelled. On examining or an inquiry, the travel history was that she had met her cousin who had cold, cough and fever also after getting wet. So if you see the symptomatology, the ailments they gave as homeopathics, we also consider the ailments from, we consider it as, they have clearly mentioned that they have got wet in rain. So in such case, we try to analyze what are the symptomatology. The only symptom she had come with, she had already started on azithromycin, and she had come with complaints of headache and low-grade fever, continuous low-grade fever. But on the history, she had travelled from Kurnool, which was at that in the month of August, was already having a number of cases of COVID. So with that suspension, we ordered for the basic investigations of CBP, CRP, and chest X-ray. CBP was normal, CRP was negative, but the chest X-ray had a few haziness in the lower zones. So with that in mind, we asked her to get investigations if at all she is not better with the medicines in a couple of days. And the next day on telephonic follow-ups, we kept in touch on telephone. Follow-up was that the fever was slightly coming down, but the headaches was there and the exhaustion was going on increasing. So I ordered for RT-PCR to be done, which came out to be positive. Okay. And then she was continuing and she was put on Briania 200, and she was already on azithromycin, which I asked her to continue along with multivitamins, and the allopath had already prescribed zinc supplements, so that was continued. So after 3 days of medications, the fever subsided. So what you have to observe is the history is of a travel history supported with the symptoms, and then you suspect only because the exhaustion was going on increasing. Otherwise the CRP was negative because it might come out to be negative in the initial infections, but the history was very short. Like in the previous slides, I have told you that the incubation period could be up from 5 to 6 days. The symptoms can develop before that also, from the 3rd day itself. She met the cousin and the next day only she had got fever. So depending on the immune status of the person also, the symptoms can come up quite early, even irrespective of the incubation period. This case highlighted that point. The second case was of a student, a hostel student who had come only with fever and severe headaches. Okay. So severe headaches, fever, the CBP was fine, only the platelet count was 1.2. The rest of the parameters were fine, CRP was negative, and this child was admitted and put on arsenic album. We started with arsenic album 200 and went up to 1M. The symptomatology was coming down, but suddenly on the 5th day he developed a slight amount of cough. And along with the cough there was no breathlessness, but the fever was on and off, going with the spikes of going up to 103. So with that, and we checked the SpO2, it was coming up to, there was no symptom of breathlessness, but just to monitor the patient, we checked the SpO2, which came down to 94. So then we repeated the X-ray, and X-ray showed a slight amount of haziness in the lower zones, but the rest of the chest findings, the respiratory examination findings were normal. Everything was normal, but we still, to avoid further complications, we are ordered for an RT-PCR, and the child went to the lab, it got a RT-PCR done, which was positive. But this child, the history was irrelevant, not very supportive, because the child was staying in the hostel, not gone out anywhere, not gone to the native, no exposure to any other people from outside, but still he had developed this COVID-19. And then the child was sent back to the hostel, kept in an isolated room for at least the next 14 days with the telephonic video calls, and the SpO2 was maintained between 94 to 98, and then it subsided. The fever had subsided on the 3rd day itself with Briania, but the SpO2 was fluctuating, so we kept under monitoring. And this case also shows that the symptomatology, whatever symptomatology, as I told you, fever, if it is not supported, because the CRP was negative initially, the chest X-ray was fine, but the fever was continuously going on spikes. The dengue was tested because the platelet had come down to 95,000, dengue was negative. So the only other option which was left at this point of time was to get a RT-PCR done. So RT-PCR came out to be positive. So variation of symptoms, because this disease is a new disease, we have getting exposed to this symptomatology, and as the researches are going on, we are getting to know new symptoms, new researches are coming out with new findings, and they are helping us to understand what to see and what not to see. Okay. So if at all the patient doesn't improve with the initial respiratory symptoms, there are chances that the patient might get affected with two other systems. One is the neurological CNS system, and the other one is GIT system. So if it is seen in neurological system is affected, you see the first thing is the loss of smell. Okay, then there is inability to taste, muscle weakness will gradually develop, and tingling numbness because of the neuropathy, and finally there is brain which is affected because of the hypoxia can be one of the reasons for the brain to be getting affected, or they could be embolism. Okay, embolism can also lead to sudden changes in the neurological function, causing dizziness, confusion, delirium, seizures, and finally state of stroke. And gastrointestinal symptoms, again the loss of appetite, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea. Diarrhea, as we have seen in the comparative thing, diarrhea can also be presenting symptom of COVID. If at all it is not affecting directly the respiratory system also, the diarrhea can also be presenting symptom with high grade fevers and abdominal pain or discomfort. So now after studying the few symptoms, let us try to understand what are the few questions which come to our mind when we are studying the COVID-19. So what is the first thing which come to our mind is, why do some people get affected easily, and why do the other people are infected but they are not presenting a lot of symptoms. Okay. The age is one factor. The other factors which come into play is the role of interferon response. Okay. So this is not basically for COVID, but it is antiviral action of the interferon basically happening in the body, in the cells. So where the virus is infecting the cells, entering and activating the INF gene, there is viral assembly which is breaking down and coming out of the cells as new viruses. Okay, while the INF gene will release the coming out of the first cell and going to the next cell. By this time, the virus is already getting into the other cell. Okay, and simultaneously, this is happening that the INF is binding to the receptors, giving signals to the nucleus, which will release the antiviral protein synthesis, which is happening, and that can destroy the viral particles. Okay, so this is the action of interferon. But if there is any inadequate interferon response, or there is the interferon which is not very responsive to the infection, not causing or not getting into action immediately, then the action will be symptoms which will come up. The other important reason is of the immune system which is getting affected, and which is if the system is not stopping at the initial response. For example, if the virus has entered, the immune system has reacted, and if after the virus is out of the body or is killed also, the immune system is going on responding, and what is called as a cytokine storm. So what is cytokine storm is nothing but the immune system which is releasing messengers and called cytokines, which will initially cause the body's tissues to getting affected. Okay? And the cytokine storm creates an exaggerated inflammatory response that can damage the rest of the body organs, mainly the liver, blood vessels, kidneys and lungs, and increase the formation of blood clots. So COVID virus, when it is getting affected into the system or coming into the system, they usually have release some inflammatory signals like a SOS message to the cells that the virus has entered, come get into the action. But if you see, I try to compare this response to warriors. The warriors in the olden times, when they were attacked by the enemies, if they are a very true warrior, they initially do not surrender. Instead of surrendering, they commit suicides. Okay, not to surrender to the attack of the enemies. So the cytokines send the signals which gets into the action, but as the cells start depleting or killing themselves, the number of multiplication of the tissue death will go on increasing. So that is nothing but the cytokine storm. Okay, the tissues are getting affected, the tissues are dying with the increased response of the cytokine, which will what will be the outcome is acute respiratory distress syndrome, multi-organ failure, hyperinflammation syndrome, and finally death if the cytokine storm is not controlled with medications or the immune response of the person is not coming back to its normalcy. I hope that is clear. But what we have to also understand that if the shortness of breath is the only symptom without any fever or anything, and the SpO2 is maintained largely at a normal range, we should also think of other problems apart from COVID-19. For example, if the person is already a known case of respiratory allergies or known case of COPD and all these things, so we should not label every shortness of breath patient as a COVID patient, because the rest of the symptoms should match, the fever should be there, or the other response, immune responses causing inflammatory changes should also be present along with the shortness of breath. So this is one caution, that every shortness of breath patient should not be considered as a suspected case of COVID. The CDC has added this as a new symptom to the warning signs. New confusion or inability to rouse. Okay, so this is the sign that it's an alarming sign or the warning sign that the neurological system is getting affected. Okay, the patient's comprehension is getting affected, the patient's sensorium is getting affected. So this has become a new warning sign to the list of other warning signs in the CDC's list. The symptom anosmia, which was initially not considered to be a very important symptom, has come out to be playing a major role, and this can be picked up quite easily by the physicians and search for the reasons for the anosmia, because anosmia can be a part of other allergic diseases also, or any other allergic inflammatory signs. Okay, so what one has to identify what is the reason for the anosmia, and if it is matching with the rest of the symptoms, then it can be considered as part of the COVID-19 presentation. But now studies are still being tried to understand how common is this common in people with COVID-19, and what point of infection does the anosmia develop. Okay, this is still under consideration of various research projects, and how to distinguish the loss of smell of COVID-19 with the other allergic diseases. Now CDC has also classified the close contact. Okay, when we are talking about social distancing, we are also concentrating on the term called as close contact. Okay, a person who is coming in close contact with an infected person. It could be a health worker, it could be a family member, it could be any person who is coming into contact. Initially the definition was someone who is spent 15 or more consecutive minutes within 6 feet of someone with COVID-19. This was the initial definition given by CDC itself, but now it has changed, and the new definition says any person who spends 15 minutes or more within 6 feet of a person with COVID-19 over a period of 24 hours. So that expands the range of the exposure which the person is getting into. So over the next 24 hours, if the person is coming in close contact, for example, if a doctor is going to the patient and examining him, and over the next 24 hours is spending at least 15 minutes with the patient, then it becomes a close contact for the infection to be spreading. So if this person close contact is getting in touch with other people in his own family or in the other faculty or in the staff of the hospital without a PPE kit, of course, then that can be considered as a close contact, and they have to take care that they sanitize themselves. Washing, sanitizing, everything should be followed as per the protocols so that they don't spread the infection quite easily. And as I was telling you, the mutations have definitely played a role. That is the reason that the symptomatology in various countries are different, and the approach in different countries is varying according to the symptoms which they are presenting. Okay, so the gene which is implicated in this is called D614G, which is a variant of the new original SARS-CoV-2 virus. Okay, and it has now become the most prevalent strain to be infecting the most number of population. So it is still not very well known whether people who were already infected will get infected with this new D614G variant of the viruses. So it becomes so very important that you maintain the SMS protocol so that you don't get affected. So patients who are already infected and come out of the infection should be still very worried if the strains are going on changing. If the strains are going on mutating, then the concern is still the same, that you should maintain social distancing, masking and sanitizing yourself. The second other thing which has to come into question is the patients without symptoms. These are the most dangerous people who behave like very brave people, that I am infected but I don't have symptoms, so they roam around in the society infecting other people. So these are the most dangerous people rather than because the patients who are affected and have symptoms, they are more careful about themselves as well as their own family members. But these people are the most dangerous people because without symptoms can be again referring to two kinds of people: those who will later on develop symptoms, or those will never develop symptoms. So the asymptomatic patients are the carriers. Okay, they are not having symptoms, but they are the most rampantly available people in the society nowadays. So 48 to 72 hours after the exposure, the patient can start spreading the disease. Okay, so it is very important that you isolate and adopt the behavior which is necessary to stop the spread. And the recent studies compared the nasal swab or the amount of virus population in the nose, throat and lungs of symptomatic and asymptomatic patients, and it found that both the patients had similar amount of viruses. So symptomatic patients will also have the similar. It is only because of the immune status that the asymptomatic patients are not having enough symptoms, but the viral load is almost similar. So that is the outcome of this research which they have found out. And initially it was found that children are not very good carriers of this symptoms or the infection, but now the studies have indicated that the children can also spread. And that is the reason that the government is still not opening the schools, because they can be the main source for spreading the infection, going back to the houses and spreading to the grandparents or whoever is the elder people in the house. So the viral load will not initially correlate with the severity of the symptoms. Now coming to the very important question, how deadly is the COVID-19? Because it has been showing that it is a very fatal disease. But if you compare the fatality rate, which will be dealt with the next department of SPM, it appears that the coronavirus has only about 1% of death rate or the mortality. Okay, but the amount which is very less compared to SARS, which was almost 11%, and MERS, which was about 35% of mortality. The reason being that the population which was affected by both these diseases was limited, and among them only the largest population was dying. But here if you see with coronavirus, the situation is different. The number of people getting infected is more, but the death rate is very less. So if you see only the numbers, it is not very evident that it is a very deadly disease, but we have to take care that the rest of the time will tell us how deadly that disease can be for the general population. So basically the age factor and as well as the immune factor will also play, and people with comorbidities will definitely have a higher risk of getting infected with this disease. In pediatric age group, there is something called as multi-system inflammatory syndrome, which was found in children who were affected with COVID and admitted to the hospital. This was a study, and it was also found in Mumbai in few cases in the hospitals which were studied. And it was linked to this coronavirus, and it was also showing symptoms similar to toxic shock or Kawasaki disease, where there was affections of the blood vessels causing vasculitis and then developing into severe shock or other symptomatology of the vasculitis. Now this is a very important question that I was telling you about, that once you are infected, does it give you a lifetime immunity? So this is still under studies, and there have been cases in India itself where the patient has come back with a severe form of the initial infection. For example, there are few cases which were infected, got treated, but after a couple of weeks they came back with a severe fibrosis of the lungs. Okay, so that reinfection can be a possibility, but it is still under study whether how much is the possibility. So as to, because the coronavirus, as in the other cases, can have a particular time period of immunity, and if it is out of that period, then it can again get infected. The person can get affected again. But the other thing which will contribute to this is the continuous mutation which is going on with the virus and the different variants which are coming into the population. So investigations, most common investigations which can be readily advised to all the patients will be CBP and CRP and chest X-ray, which we have been helping a lot in identifying the risk, patients at risk or people at risk. And then if, of course with the, and this investigations have been according to the different states, they have different protocols. For example, my uncle who was affected and was admitted with a severe ARDS in Karnataka. They went on only with CBP and chest X-ray. Since their chest X-ray showed clear-cut pneumonia, they didn't advise for a CT scan till he was almost there for almost 1 week. So here the protocol is different. Here in Hyderabad, people usually are advised to go for a CT scan as soon as they find some changes in the chest X-ray. So every medical fraternity in different states have their own protocols. So as far as our state is concerned, chest X-ray and chest CT scan is widely advised, and they have come up with a lot of informative data, that there is ground glass opacities which are most commonly found, and then now they have started grading it as cohorts 1 to cohorts 5. Okay, so that will help you in understanding the mortality or the morbidity which the patient has, and that can be taken up for the management schedule. And like sir had spoken in the last class, there are other tests which are rapid antigen test, antibody test, and RT-PCR, and D-dimer and LDH. D-dimer is sensitive test which can be picked up in and can predict the mortality for the patients who is admitted in the hospital. Okay, but it is not specific, because D-dimer can be raised in other infections also, right? So it is a sensitive disease, sensitive test to identify how much is the risk for this patient to land up in complications, but it is not specific that the COVID, it is not a diagnostic test for COVID-19. Okay. Similarly, LDH will also be raised in other systemic illnesses, and it will give you an indication about the person's number of days to be spent in the hospital and what are the complications which can develop. Okay, whether the person is going into respiratory complications, not going into respiratory complications, so what are the protocols to be followed. All this will be helpful in identifying for these tests. So very important study to be now taken up is mental health in this pandemic, which is very alarming, at an alarming rate spreading, because this is not very evident, because patients do not come telling you these symptoms, but they are internally suffering a lot. Okay, most of the people usually, when they are infected, the first reaction is denial. Okay, they think, why me? I didn't get into contact with any other patient. Why should I get infected? And I'm not infected. The test must be wrong, or the doctor must be telling lies. So all this, the first reaction is denial, and then when they start accepting it, then the symptomatology, the mental state starts changing, and they try to absorb that we are infected and we should take care of the other family members. And then as the disease improves, they are at a better state. Otherwise, they go into depressions. Okay? And if depression can not only be with the infected people, but also apart from that, the other people who have been affected by the lockdown have been going into a lot of depressive states, losing jobs, losing the family members. All these are reasons for the depressions which have been coming up in the society. And there is fear psychosis. Most of it is because of the media, okay, which is spreading a lot of rumors, spreading a lot of viral videos, and that is causing a lot of psychosis among the elderly people. And then there are suicidal thoughts or attempts made by a lot of patients and their attendants because of the financial loss or the economic burden which they have faced, a lot of depressive states, and all this is contributing to the depriving mental health in the entire world. This is not pertaining only to India. India still, there's a lot of scope to conduct studies in this area because most of us are focusing only on the physical health. But mental health has definitely been affected because a lot of people have migrated back to their natives. Migrants have walked for miles together, for days together, not having jobs. People are still coming back. Most of the software people have been laid down. All this is causing a lot of depressions, right? So this is one important aspect which has to be studied and kept in mind when you are dealing with symptoms or when you are dealing with patients with COVID-19. So what has been now focused is on a new normal. Okay, what is the new normal is a lot of webinars have spoken about this new normal is COVID is here to stay for a long period of time. Okay. In the initial phases and in the initial few months only, the WHO chief had announced that COVID is not going anywhere for the next 2 years. So what we have to do is adjust with whatever we have, right? Whatever changes we have been asked to take care, all this mask have to be there for a long period of time, sanitization, SMS protocol has to be followed for a long period of time, and that is going to stay with us, and we have to stick to this so that we don't get infected, neither we get exposed to other patients, nor we spread it to the other family members or to the other people in the society. So what are the changes which will be found in the new normal? There will be a lot of changes. The schooling system will change. The people in the cafeteria or in the canteens, the exposure will be changed. Workplace will be showing a lot of changes in the pattern. A lot of travel norms will be changing, and they have already changed. If you go to the supermarket, distancing, social distancing, masking, temperature recording, everything has come into place. You have visited a lot of shops and everywhere. But all this is what is supposed to be, which is not done actually in the general population. Okay? Because of the initial, especially if you talk about Hyderabad city, in the last month's floods have caused a lot of havoc. So all this have been thrown into air. All the norms have been thrown into air, and they have not been followed well. So general management, if the patients are asking you what they should do at home, irrespective of whether they are taking symptoms or not taking symptoms, the first thing they have to take is they are having mild symptoms. If they are having mild symptoms, the first thing they have to take is rest at home, stay at home, not go to school or work for a few days at least, and drink a lot of fluids because dehydration will further lower down your immune status. Monitor your vitals. You have been trained. You can everywhere now the pulse oximeters are available. Digital BP apparatus is common in each and every house. And then if you have symptoms which are developing or which are worsening, then you definitely consult a doctor. If he advises to get admitted, you get admitted. So this is the general guidelines you should give to the patients who are asking or seeking your help. If they are having some patient in the house, or if they are infected and have shown few symptoms. And the most important thing should not forget is not to infect other people. So not to be daredevils, not to be very brave and say that I am infected but I am not infective. So that will be a most dangerous falsity on your part, and especially for people who are staying with you as elders, you should take care of them, and wearing a mask and all these protocols which have to be followed very meticulously. And as physicians, I suggest that you all take up this course which is propagated by WHO, and this course will give you a guidelines. It is a 6-module course which will help you in understanding what are the different things which can be studied and understood as physicians, as healthcare managers or people in the healthcare system. It's not opening. You can go to the this open WHO.org, and you have a course which is can be taken up any time in your leisure time. There is no fixed time for taking up. Then you have a test, quiz kind of test, which is there. And if you achieve 80% of the marks, then you get a certificate, online e-certificate. All these things will be important as physicians to understand how we have to approach the patients and how we have to deal with the patients, and what are the things to be taken as precautions for ourselves as well as for our patients. So what is not to be forgotten is Do Gaj Ki Duri, Mask Hai Zaruri, which is nowadays propagated by the Government of India, Minister of Health. Thank you. Any questions, any inputs?
Sir, can you please explain what are all the prognostic factors like? So, in which situations prognosis is bad, which situation prognosis is expected to be a good, like, especially severe infection, like.
Especially?
Severe infection like situation.
Yes, severe infections was one thing is if you have to continuously monitor your saturation, oxygen saturation, and it has to be above 94. That is the cutoff line which is expected now. Initially it was 98 is the normal, 98 to 100 is the normal, but now they have given it as a 94 as the cutoff. Anything going below that, you have to be concerned about it. Take physician's opinion. If the symptoms are worsening, the respiratory symptoms are worsening, the dyspnea is persistent, then you have to get investigated. What is the level of your CRP? What is the leukopenia? Because CVP will definitely show a leukopenia. That will be, if it is very less, then you have to see the ratio of neutrophil versus the lymphocytes. So lymphocytes. So that will be one prognostic factor. And the second thing is, if it is possible to get a chest CT scan done, which will show definitely the areas which are affected and how much is the affection which is present, and what are the lobes, how many lobes are affected, because there are few patients who have come to the hospital with complete one lungs which is blocked. They are still not and they're still not very symptomatic. SpO2 is maintaining between 80 to 90, and they are robust. Because of the robustness also, the patient might not throw up symptoms, but they might be affected internally. The third thing is, if at all the severity is going on increasing, I said the D-dimer will definitely help you in understanding. If the D-dimer is quite high in thousands, then it will definitely be needing admission in the IPD and treated accordingly, and the monitoring has to be accordingly to that. And other thing is your general health. What is the weakness, exhaustion, and everything. If it is not subsiding with medicines, not subsiding with your whatever immune boosters you are taking, or the good diet you are taking, then all this will be definitely a bad sign for your general recovery.
Sir, the most common symptoms, as you said, is the dry cough and mild fever.
Yes.
What are the atypical cases you have encountered where these two symptoms are not there and still the patient was a COVID positive? Can you have you ever encountered any such case?
The second case which I mentioned was only fever with.
Fever is there. That's why without these two symptoms, have you encountered?
I have not encountered personally, but I have heard of patients coming with only diarrhea.
Okay.
Only coming with diarrhea with a lot of exhaustion, with CVP showing the leukopenias and lymphocytopenia. Then on examination they might turn out to be COVID, or investigations they might turn out to be COVID. But atypical symptoms, especially in India, are very rare. Most of them are coming up with respiratory illnesses itself.
So it is observed that certain people they are dying suddenly after post-COVID infection.
Yes.
What must be the probable reason? Because if we have to take example like Ahmed Patel and some other even politicians, they have died after recovering from COVID-19 infection. So what can be the complications?
Thromboembolism is the most commonest factor, which is thromboembolism. Because of the raise the D-dimer levels also, there is chances are that the clotting mechanism is hampered and the thrombolism can cause sudden deaths. Mostly pulmonary embolism is the most commonest factor which is playing there.
Just for an interest, one of the opposition leader in Pakistan was very healthy and died within 24 hours after, and they declared it has been death as COVID. If you have seen the news, can such thing happen when a person is completely healthy, talking like this, and the next day he dies of COVID
My whole knuckle has expired within 1 hour.
within 1 hour?
Within 1 hour.
So, is it COVID? Just because there's a COVID
Symptoms.
positive, is it COVID?
Many symptoms were COVID, but he is not tested with COVID. But he was, the death certificate declared it as cardiac event because they didn't want to go it for a postmortem kind of thing. No doctor certified it as cardiac event. But the symptomology after coming to know from the family members was showing like a COVID symptom because he was sweating profusely with a lot of chilliness the previous night, and suddenly he, the previous 2 days he had a loss of taste in mouth.
No, death certificates, I'm sorry to say, I don't believe the death certificates in India because every death certificate contains cardiorespiratory arrest.
And I am telling you that
So-
death certificates were modified.
It is mostly the happy hypoxia. That thing actually, people are not knowing only. Happy hypoxia is one of the important thing. Actually, the term was there for beginning itself. So now, like most of the people actually are ignored. They don't say that mild fever even. They don't understand mild fever these days.
No sir, what happened is patients are by COVID test RT-PCR test they are negative.
No, what actually
And
is
within
telling
a
that
few
suddenly
period of
death.
time they are getting suddenly they are collapsing.
Now, where you say that it suddenly happened, actually it is we are very sure that the patient is having the problem, it is going on, but they is mild form and they may not be just what do you call it, taking it account much. So again, it is like a happy hypoxia. That is the most important thing that it is going on, the process happening. They don't experience it.
No, before COVID also there were sudden deaths in the world. Just the COVID came, we started attributing it to COVID or something like that, because sudden deaths were taking place previously also. Sweating, chest pain, breathlessness, all these things are happening, the deaths are happening. Not just because there is a COVID virus, we are attributing it to it.
That is a possibility because the social stigma is such that everything happens such a days.
So sir, thromboembolism or pulmonary embolism is the most common cause after post-COVID complication.
Yes.
I think COVID being a multi-organ illness. Myopathy has been myocarditis, myopathy, cardiac arrhythmias, and then thromboembolism. These have been the 4 most common causes of sudden death in COVID. And of course, what Dr. Dole was saying is also correct. Most of the time, the symptoms are picked up very late by the patient himself. The subject himself does not recognize that there is hypoxia. So, though the physiological mechanisms or when you measure oxygen levels, you find that they are low, the patient is absolutely asymptomatic or he doesn't experience that. So, he doesn't report. So, the most common causes of death have been due to late reporting of further treatment. That's one. Oxygenation had failed long before they reported to the hospital, and that's been the most important cause. Once oxygenation fails, arrhythmias, developing arrhythmias, developing pro-inflammatory responses, all that happens. So, cardiac arrhythmias, myocarditis, late cardiomyopathies, and thromboembolism. These have been the 4 most common causes of sudden death in COVID, followed by a happy hypoxia. Essentially means you had COVID, you didn't recognize it, you reported late, and by the time you reported, the decompensation had already started. And so, Dr. Irfan, I think the 2 points that I thought you should also would have added is IL-6, because that has IL-6 and serum ferritin. Yes, those are the 2 most important, parameters which were giving the inflammatory generalized inflammatory response that was going to be and second thing is there is a time to do these investigations. So for example, if I do a CBC, CRP and IL-6 on day 1, I may not get to see the true picture. So the true picture is available, so there is a frequency of repeating these investigations as to when do we repeat what. So for example, CRP was best seen to be rise on day 0, day 5 and day 9. No, for all the cases, day 0, day 5 and day 9 showed the best response to CRP. Okay, IL-6 never showed a response on day 1, and if the IL-6 was raised on day 1, it had a very D-dimers were very late to react. So if you do a D-dimer on day 1 in the initial case, then you miss them. Even you miss it. So you feel that no, D-dimer is not showing nice in the prognosis. So these tests will have to be repeated at a certain frequency, certain period, and then compared for their values. I think you did mention during the discussion the neutrophil lymphocyte ratio, but that is the very early indicator, very early indicator, because the screening tests were usually CBC, CBP as you could say, CRP. These are your screening tests, correct? And X-ray chest, if it is really showing a shadow, that means so the screening test is not an X-ray chest, it is an HRCT. So if you want to screen an RT-PCR, considering all the sampling errors, the storage issues, the transport issues, the error rate essentially kind of built up to almost around 25%. So the sensitivity though of the test is more than 95% because of sampling errors, because of transport, because of media storage, everything. By media I mean the viral media storage. The compounded thing was less than 75%. Correct. So that's why HRCT became more easy to access. More immediately you would get a confirmatory response, and it will be objective to everybody within 2 hours whether you have a chest infection or not. And if you did not have the chest infection, that means you were going to be a mild or asymptomatic case, which essentially was self-limiting. So that is why HRCT was used, because of its ease of getting the diagnosis. HRCT, you would get a diagnosis in an hour, whether you are positive, whether you have a chest infection or not. Second thing is, X-rays would not give you the right picture because all these infections were subpleural. They are diffuse subpleural infections. The inflammations were diffuse and subpleural. So an X-ray test, for X-ray test to pick up a pneumonia with some amount of confidence, you need a lobular consolidation. So that is why X-ray test is not it's not a gold standard. So I think correlating IL-6 with HRCT is a very critical factor. CRP levels, neutrophil lymphocyte ratios, HRCT, and correlating that with IL-6 levels. If these are in one line, on day 1 you know what is the prognosis of the case. To my understanding, what has proved to be the difference between death and life has been early reporting, prognosticating and starting low molecular weight heparins, early starting of oxygenation. These have been the 3 most important things that has proved to be, and in some cases steroids. So these are the 4 most important things that have clearly been proven as having made impact on the treatment of a patient. So that is the thing that I would suggest. And from a medicine perspective, I would expect that we should add therapeutics as a expression to when we say that we are talking about these cases. there is a therapeutic expression that has to be given from a homeopathic perspective.
I was under the impression Mathematica department is being given that.
But no problem. I mean, what I'm saying is, I'm not saying that you do it. We should complete this only with the therapeutic. That what is the therapeutic approach to what problem that we see around over here at this point of time. So we will do that. So I think. Oh,
Sir, you said regarding the diagnostics tests now, sir, HRCT like that. So after a period of time, if the patient's symptoms are gone, so what are the prognostic signs factors to go, sir?
so I think.
And I have another thing, sir. What is the role of serum ferritin? Especially majority of the people are going with serum ferritin levels. If the D-dimer levels are still more, so what is its role, sir?
It's a different thing. See, I think one more thing that you brought in and which is very important is how do you prognosticate post-COVID? So what are the post-COVID complications that we are looking at? That's point number one. I think very commonly what is seen is post-COVID fibrosis of lung. Post-COVID cardiomyopathies are being seen. Post-COVID microangiopathies are seen. And of course, sorry. Microangiopathies and thromboembolism is something that has been seen. I have seen a post-COVID gangrene. Okay, so the patient presented essentially with gangrene. So one of the things that you were asking is what are these rare, patients are presented with blindness because of microthrombi getting lodged in the, correct. So these are some of these post-COVID complications that are going on. Most patients are recovering very slow. Those who have severe infections, they are recovering very slow. Their what we call as neurasthenia, the weakness part is recovering very, very slow. There have been almost syndromes which are very similar to Guillain-Barré's, kind of stuff. Post-COVID cough, though the infection is gone, there is post-COVID, dry cough that remains. And of course, the dyspnea on exertion because of lung fibrosis. So how do we prognosticate? Now that's your second issue. Immediately post-COVID, all those who have had chest infection should undergo a PFT test between 4 weeks post-COVID. So they have to undergo a post-COVID PFT, they have to undergo a post-COVID 2D echo. That's the most important thing to do. IL-6 levels, serum ferritin levels takes around 3 weeks to come down. But once they are dipping down, usually the aspect is yes. So these are some of the issues that we realized. One of the cases that we found is recovered from COVID and developed a falciparum malaria. He recovered from COVID, came home and developed Rygers. And I think it was falciparum or Virex, I don't remember, but he developed malaria. So these are all indications that they really do bad with their immunity in general, especially in older people with comorbidities. So to prognosticate, do a post-COVID PFT, do a post-COVID 2D echo, and once the IL-6 and the other inflammatory responses are down, then do these two things. Usually HRCT should be done, repeat HRCT should be done only after 3 months. Because that is when you will really know, what is the status of fibrosis that has happened. Between 1 and 3 months, usually it will not be very, very correct. So immediately do a PFT and a 2D echo, and after 3 months do a HRCT. So that
This malaria which you mentioned could be an incidental infection.
it just depends that what it tells you that you get more,
Immune system gets depleted.
That's right. So you get what you would otherwise not get, you would kind of catch up with those kind of things. So this is I think what is worrying to the community now earlier was the mortality rate, and that once it has come under control, businesses will open up, people will start doing the work. 1% mortality rate in any medical condition is non-acceptable, right? And though it is 1% of what?
Yes.
you know, the denominator matters.
But is that 1% correct? Because most of the COVID cases are unreported. So how did they come to a conclusion of 1%?
1% of reported RT-PCR only, that is one part of it. The second part is 1% is what is said now. If you would see the trend that India had, India started with almost around 4.5 to 6 or 4.5 to 5, and even today, I think, if I'm not mistaken, some states are still around between 2 and 3. 2 and 3. So 1% is like when you look at, you know, all the states which never had it. Like for example, northeastern states did not have it much. Correct. So they were always in green zone. So when you take that average, it comes down to 1%. But the states which were impacted, the mortality rate was pretty high. Right. So, you know, I think the biggest fear was mortality, not catching of the infection, but bigger fear was whether we will survive or not. That was, and the mental health factor, if you would see, correct, and the mental health factor that was clearly seen is that most people suffered. I was a part of one survey that we did. People are very, very clear. The biggest stress was financial stress. The second stress was the stigma of getting affected by the social stigma. And the last was their own emotional, you know, state of affairs. They will go. That's right. So biggest stress that everybody faced was the financial stress. Because there is hardly anybody who did not get impacted by COVID and the finance related issues to that. So mental stress, yes, it was, and almost around 15 to 17%, if I'm not mistaken, if I can recall it correct, required mental health professional, help required. Others could recover on their own with, family time and, talking to people, and slowly the situation improved. But almost around 14-15% of people required mental health assistance to handle this. So this is the overall scenario. Thank you. I think it was good. Maybe we can touch upon some of these issues in our further discussion and take it up. So Dr. Dole, next time क्या करना है अपने को?